Hey everybody, welcome back. Today's video was requested by a follower and it is going to be about Microsoft 365 AI agents from a human forward perspective. For this lab, I'm using a fake internal IT support scenario that keeps the focus on how an agent should be built without putting real company data or real users into the mix. Now, the agent we are building today is basically meant to answer support questions from approved material. It's going to be able to help someone understand a process, but it should not act like it owns the process. That is the part that I kind of want to focus on in this video because to me, workplace AI does not become safe just because it has fast answers, all right? It needs a clear role, trusted information, and limits on what it can actually hold. So ultimately, what we're doing here is not building an AI worker. We are trying to actually create the foundation of a support tool that can kind of help people move through a process while keeping the main responsibility with the human beings who actually own the work. However, before we get into all of this, I want to start with where I stand on AI, okay? Because that shaped a lot about how I built this. And quite frankly, I don't want people flaming me in the comments about how much I love it, because quite frankly, I do have reservations. So we're going to talk about those. Now, again, I'm going to be clear. I am not holistically anti AI. I am anti bad AI implementation. Okay. I know when this conversation starts, a lot of people's first instinct is to talk about the environmental impact of AI. And I do agree that matters. The infrastructure behind this technology is expanding rapidly fast, and that does come with real costs. But to me, the bigger question is, why are companies trying to scale it so aggressively in the first place? Why are they trying to build stuff that they don't even necessarily have the, I guess, the evolution and their technology to create and build without all of this cost to the environment and to the people around them? I'm going to be real with you and say what my theory is and my understanding of the situation based on all of the research that I've done. A lot of this push around AI is tied to replacement. Okay, the name artificial intelligence already makes it sound like to the average person that the goal is to build something that can stand in for a person. And tech companies, let's admit it, have really leaned into that idea. They sell it like a way to move faster, cut labor, and reduce the need for human involvement. But that is the part that I have a problem with, okay? When AI is treated like a replacement strategy, lose power, customers get worse support, and companies start trusting tools in places where human judgment should actually still be. Now, all of this to say, I do think the technology has potential. I just think that the goal needs to change because instead of framing this as artificial intelligence wanting to replace somebody, I think the better direction is assistive intelligence wanting to help somebody. The point, again, of all of this should be to help people process information faster, understand internal workflows more clearly, and get through the repetitive support work without removing the person from that decision. That is the version of AI that this entire lab is built around. That is the version of AI that I believe in. So now that my stance about all of this is clear, we can kind of get into the practical part, which is what this agent is going to actually need before it can actually help somebody do the work. So this is the first thing that this agent is going to need. A workflow, right? An agent cannot help with a process if the process is not clearly defined. So for this lab, that process is going to be internal IT support. Basically, the agent is not going to be built to answer every random workplace question. It's going to be built to help someone move through a specific process. Now, once the workflow is clear, the next thing that it's going to need is approved information. If the agent is going to explain this internal process to somebody, the answer needs to come from material that the organization actually trusts about those topics. Otherwise, you're going to have an AI that sounds super helpful and confident while leading you completely in the wrong direction. After that's kind of set up, we basically decide and set up rules around what the AI is allowed to do with the information that's provided. Because for this lab, the agent is going to be allowed to explain the process and make the next step easier to understand, but it's not going to cross into restricted action or act like it owns the request. So once all of those pieces are kind of clear to you, we can kind of move into the mock agent for this lab, which is North Star IT Assist, and we can talk a little bit about that. Now, North Star IT Assist is basically the example that we're using for the rest of the lab. All right, it is a fake internal IT support agent built for a fake company with fake support material. The point is to make the idea practical without bringing in real users or business data, as I mentioned before. In this scenario, the agent is again going to just help with common IT support questions. Think of it like a first stop for somebody who needs direction before a real person or team takes over for that request. Now, the slide here is just going to show you what it can help with and what it can't do, but the main idea of all of this is pretty simple. It is allowed to guide the user, but it is not allowed to become the decision maker for them. So now that we kind of know what agent we're building, the next thing is basically to talk about the environment that we are going to build it in. So pretty simple slide. It's just a basic skills check so you know what you need before starting. Once you have everything ready, you can kind of move on to that next slide and kind of talk about getting the lab kit set up. Lab kit slide, all right? Basically, I'm not going to read every click out loud because the directions are already on the slide. You're just going to follow the steps above, download it, unzip it, and open the folder. The most important thing to kind of understand is just what the lab kit is for. Now, this is basically the practice material for the whole build. It's going to give us the fake company documents, fake data, agent instructions, testing prompts, and some governance files that we're going to need to build the agent safely. So instead of, going through all of that, I'm going to kind of use this next slide to kind of talk about a little bit more of what's in the kit and explain it in some more plain language. All right. Easiest way to think about this is that each folder supports a different part of the agent. Okay. The knowledge base is what the agent reads from. This is where like the mock policy documents are going to live. Now, the mock data is going to give the lab a fake company environment so that we have example users, tickets, and requests without using anything real, right? And the agent build folder, that is going to be where the actual setup material lives. That is what's going to basically help define how the agent should behave. And then you're going to see governance. Now, that governance is the safety side. It's going to give us the review material for things like escalation, risk, and permissions. And we have a testing folder. So that testing folder is basically how we check whether the agent behaves the way that we intended. And the resources folder is just, there if you want to keep learning after the build, but there's also resources at the end of this presentation as well. I think some of them are doubled up in there, but nonetheless, take a look. So ultimately, all of this the same, but the lab kit is not just a random folder of files. It is the support system for the agent and what it knows, how it behaves, how we can test it, and how we review whether it's safe enough to use. So once you can kind of understand this kit, we can move on into Copilot Studio and start building. Right. Now we are moving out of the lab kit and into Copilot Studio. Basically, this slide has the sign in steps, so you can just follow those as shown. If you don't have a Microsoft account, you can just create one. It goes to the same place, so if you just hit create instead of sign in, you should be able to go through that process by yourself. The only thing I would keep in mind is that when you're going through all of these steps, that Microsoft loves changing labels and putting things in different places. So if your screen doesn't match perfectly what is up here, that is okay. Do not panic because the goal here isn't really to memorize the interface. The goal is to understand the concepts enough to where you can intuitively go and look for things without having to be told exactly where something is. Now, after the home page loads and you get all of this done, the first real build step is just giving the agent its name, role, and scope. So let's talk about that. Now, first build step, the real one anyway, we're going to create the agent as North Star IT Assist and use the description that's on this slide. Basically, the description acts like the agent's job assignment. It's going to tell the agent this is an internal IT support role, not a general workplace assistant. It's also going to keep the agent tied to approved documents, which matters because the rest of the build depends on a very narrow purpose. From there, the next piece is the rule set, which is going to control how the agent behaves inside the role. So let's talk. All right, the rule set. This is where we're going to tell the agent how to behave, okay? The description gave it a job, the rules explain how it should handle that job. So basically, what we're going to do is define the agent's role, what it can answer, and what source material it should use, and when it should refuse or escalate. The main point is that limit before power. Does that make sense? Because before we can connect the agent to knowledge, we need to make sure it understands the boundary of its role so it's not giving out all of this information that it shouldn't be. Now, with the behavior rules in place, the next step is giving the agent the approved material that it can actually use. So let's get into that. This part is about grounding the agent, basically. The rules tell it how to behave, but the knowledge base gives it something reliable to actually pull an answer from. For this lab, that means using the mock policy documents in the knowledge base folder, and those documents are going to be the approved source material for the agent, as we have mentioned many times before. Now, that matters because internal support answers should not come from guesswork, okay? If the agent is explaining a process, it needs to pull from material we chose on purpose. So, this step is basically where the agent stops being a blank assistant and starts actually being connected to the support information that we need for the lab. Now, the next thing we need to set up is how users begin the conversation with it. So, conversation starters are basically the first prompts that users see when they open the agent. They matter because they can show the user what the agent is actually designed to help with. So, instead of leaving people guessing as to what to ask, we can actually give them examples that match the support role that we've already built. Now, for this lab, those starter points might point the user towards, approved things like MFA help, mailbox access, reporting a phishing thing, or maybe asking access questions. So, all to say, this step is less about the decoration of it all and more about guiding the user into the right kind of interaction. But from here, basically, we can kind of see how the agent handles normal questions inside that scope. This is the testing slide for the normal use cases, right? Basically, we are checking whether the agent can answer the kinds of questions it was actually built for. At this point, the agent should be using the information from the knowledge base and responding with the approved process, not making up its own version of the answer. So this is where we can confirm that the basic support flow works before we try anything, substantially more difficult. After that, we're going to kind of test what happens when the user asks for something outside of that agent's limits. This is where we test those limits. Basically, we can already check whether the agent can handle normal questions. Now, what we want to see is what happens when someone asks for something that the agent shouldn't be able to do. So, since we already set some rules around its behavior, we can use these prompts up here to see whether those rules actually held. Now, the goal is to catch problems early, right? Because if the agent gives away information it should protect, works around a policy, or creates a security risk by trying too hard to help, then the rules need to be tightened, and they need to be made a little bit more narrow. Now, a good result here is refusal with a redirection. Basically, is this is just like if you're with talking even with ChatGPT and you're telling it to do something that it wasn't designed for or it's not allowed to do. What it's going to do is follow this process of refuse the request, explain the boundary, and then it's going to offer the approved process or offer you another option to proceed. Now, after all of that is said and done, with both the normal use and the misuse cases tested, we can kind of step back and look at the governance pieces around this agent. Now, this is the quick part, but it does matter. Basically, the governance folder is the safety check around the agent. It's where we make sure that the agent is not just answering questions, but fitting into a real support process. The files in here are going to help you think through reviews, permissions, risk, escalation, and all of that refusal behavior. I'm not going to really go through each one in detail here because there is a lot. But the point of all of them is pretty simple. If an agent is going to touch workplace processes, someone needs to be responsible for checking what it can do, and that's how you do that. So now that we're done, we can kind of recap as to what we built and talk a little bit more about it. So, recap here. This is not just a chatbot, okay? It is a small example of how internal agents can be put together without giving it more power than it really needs. We started with a specific workflow, then gave the agent approved material to answer from, From there, we added rules around how it should behave and tested whether those rules held up in normal and unsafe situations. And we pointed out that each piece has a job, right? The workflow keeps the agent focused, the knowledge keeps the answers grounded, the rules keep it from crossing into authority, and the test shows whether the setup actually works. So, what we built is not an AI replacement for support, okay? What we built is a support layer around the human process. That is what leads into this next slide. Um, and I want to talk a little bit about some stuff before we finally fall away. Human forward model, all right? A support agent should expand what people can handle by reducing busy work, okay? The agent can make information easier to find. The request path can become easier for the user. And support teams can ultimately, if this technology is used correctly, spend less time repeating the same explanations to people over and over. But all of this should still belong to the people. The accountability needs to be with the people. Because when the work requires judgment, approval, or just general responsibility, a human has to stay in the loop for that. That is the difference between capacity expansion, which, by the way, reduces pricing costs for customers and half a dozen other things that companies are clearly trying to avoid, and most importantly, human elimination. A human forward model gives workers better support without treating workers like optional parts of the process, because let's be real, they're not. And that is the main point of this lab. AI should make the work easier to move through, but it should not remove the person responsible for the work. Now, I'm going to end this on the resource slide. So you have the lab kit and the main docs if you want to build this yourself. So let's look at that. Last slide, all right? This is the main resources that you'll use in the lab. As I mentioned before, there is a part of the resources piece in the lab kit that'll show you some more stuff. It might even have basically the same things on here. I built it a couple days ago and I have done a lot of things since then, so I don't know. I'm going to be so real with you. But from here, everything is just following the instructions, going through, looking into all of this stuff from the actual manuals. And, once you want to build this yourself, come back to this presentation and do the slides. Try to follow along as best as you can. And if you have any suggestions for other videos or labs that you want to see, please like, follow, and comment. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.